We, over the last 2 years, two and a half years, we rapidly have expanded from from having less than $1 million in assets under management to today having over $20 million in assets under management.
Welcome back, Frontier family. Hope you're all ready to learn more and earn more. In this episode, we have David Little. Out of college, he became a petroleum engineer, but was quickly unmotivated due to the time commitment taking him away from his family and friends. Not a good start. So to get out of the mundane 9 to 5, he started getting into real estate investing as a side hustle and eventually found his niche in the lending space. With his own money, he built a strong foundation, eventually co-founding Crown Capital Resources, and just recently went full-time and left that W-2 job behind. So let's get started there. David, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Drew. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So tell us about that, man. What about that W-2, outside of obviously the time commitment? We touched on that a little bit, right? But what made you want to get out of that? What was there? Was there a turning point that really was like, hey, we got to start looking at some other side hustles to really get out of this?
Well, I might be a little bit different than most. The mentality of I want to shift out of this didn't happen until much later in my career. Very early on, it was just interest to learn other things. So the engineering career was very tough, and there was definitely a lot of things to learn in that. But I was always driven towards real estate, wanted to pursue it. So shortly after starting with my real estate career, I started just dabbling into different real estate ventures, went down the semi-predictable path of starting with single-family homes and then moved into a bunch of other different projects until ultimately finding lending where I kind of created a home.
Absolutely. And so were some of those first projects involving like single families, some duplexes? What were some of those initial investments?
Yes, my initial goal was to get to 10 single-family rentals, start cash flowing them. And what I learned along the way with that is that even though we were picking them up at really competitive prices, I started acquiring single-family residentials in around 2010. So it was a great time to be buying. But even then, I found out that even with good leverage and decent tenants, one major maintenance nightmare is going to, pretty much destroy your annual cash flow. So I don't particularly view the single family rental portfolio as a great cash flow game when you look at it. If anything, it's kind of my thinking now long term is, well, that cash flow probably hopefully maintains the majority of the bills, and really it's just an appreciation game at that point. But the great part about that end of the real estate game is that if you're out like I was at the time and purchasing, $100,000 to $150,000 homes, number one, it's easy to hit that debt service coverage ratio to where they will at least go cash flow neutral. And then secondly, there's not a huge barrier to entry as far as capital is concerned, right? So a 20% down payment might be $20,000, $25,000. That's a lot more doable than a lot of other ventures that you're going to find in real estate.
Absolutely. And could you mind talking to us a little bit about that struggle you had with some of those maintenance calls and whatnot?
Yeah, I think the main way I would kind of verbalize it is it's when you are the maintenance crew for your rentals and you're the owner operator and, an air conditioner blows out in the middle of a Texas summer, they're going to call you until you pick up, until you fix it. And so another thing that I ultimately found with my single family rentals is that it was very hard to maintain, a high level engineering role along with build this rental portfolio at the same time. It was just not tenable to really do both businesses at the same time. And then, so what I ultimately transitioned to was hiring a property management company. But at that point, it further erodes your actual cash flow for the project. So I think all in all, I ended up holding them for about 7 years and then liquidated my portfolio. I started about 2017 or so, started moving out of that portfolio.
And just to paint the picture a little bit better, right, as you were doing this yourself, running the operation yourself, were you buying a house every year, every other year? What was your kind of strategy? And then obviously when you left, was it still profitable at that time, even with the property manager?
Yeah, so I was trying to buy one property a year. I did that for 4 years until I started moving into some other real estate ventures. They would cash flow positive. I think from my perspective, when I really looked at it, the amount of time that I was spending on it versus the residual cash that was really yielding just really wasn't there. And then, additionally, every hour that I was spending towards the rental properties was on top of the 40 to 50 hours I was already working for the engineering role that I was with. So it just became a real grind for ultimately what me ended up just being, a very nominal amount of actual monthly cash flow. And so it was just kind of like the juice wasn't, or the juice wasn't worth the squeeze ultimately.
And not to harp on it too much, but I don't want to graze over it, right? That's to your point. You're in a high level role. You're seeing this almost as an investment, a route forward to help grow the money you've already worked hard for, right? But to your point, you're spending hours after work, putting in more work and that return on that, right? So just to paint that picture and then we'll move on. Was a lot of it just kind of researching new properties or was more of it maintenance? What was kind of that soaking up that time that really made you decide, hey, it's kind of start looking at some other avenues?
It was just general maintenance and then operations. I mean, I was still doing the maintenance all by myself at that point in time. So it was, physically going out there, driving 30, 40 minutes to the property, fixing the part or going and getting the, garbage disposal and then installing it myself. So it would, burn through a Saturday very easily. And then it was just kind of having to sneak away from work during meetings or lunch hours to take tenant phone calls. And then it was dealing with some of the marketing when there were gaps in tenants as well, when people moved out. And so it was just kind of all those things together. But, I will say this, and I don't want to discount it because the experience ultimately was really, really great. And it was one step of many steps on my journey in the real estate world that made me realize like it's a low barrier to entry to get in. You can get a decent amount of leverage as a new investor, which is great. And what it showed me was I particularly don't want to scale this to 50 properties. I don't want to scale this to 100 single family rentals. So it was a great learning opportunity. And, I take some of those lessons even with me now in the hard money lending business. But it ultimately, for me, I just didn't find the passion in it, right? And because I was doing real estate from the get-go as a passion project, not necessarily as an escape hatch from the W. So for me, when I just didn't find that passion, I just had to try something else. And the next thing that I ended up jumping into was a raw land development out in the DFW area, an area called Van Alstyne. And that was a very, very interesting deal. Very, very slow pace. I took a long time to kind of get that project put together and off the ground. And ultimately, again, like not something I was super passionate about, but great learning experience. And then after that, Airbnbs, so the journey kind of went on and on and on until me and my co-founder did our first hard money loan together. And that was 2017.
So through all those experiences, what kind of led you to the hard money lending itself, right? And of those experiences, what prepared you for hard money lending? How did you realize, hey, we could do this?
We kind of fell backwards into it, to be honest with you. It wasn't necessarily something I was seeking out. I had some experience as a passive LP investor in a hard money lending fund. So I had seen a little bit of the background of how they worked structurally. And then what ended up happening was right around end of 2016, me and the co-founder of Crown Capital Resources got together, decided we wanted to flip a house, and we had a really tough time actually acquiring the property. We kept striking out week after week, month after month, until ultimately a friend of ours called us early 2017 and said, hey, I've actually got a great flip under contract. However, I don't have the capital to make it work. And so luckily for us, since we had, I had moved out of some of my rental portfolios and my business partner had moved out of some of his Airbnb portfolios, we were both pretty pretty liquid at the time. And we were able to pool our funds and essentially issue our first hard money loan as not a passive LP investor, but as the lender itself. And we originated that note. Fast forward 4 months, they renovated the property, it sold, and we got our payback. And for us, it was kind of a realization like, man, this is an incredible avenue to deploy capital in a relatively passive manner to earn double-digit returns on it and to still very much be able to kind of run this business in tandem with maintaining the engineering job as well. So that's really why ultimately, once we kind of kicked off our first hard money loan at payback, we thought, man, we really over the course of the next year or so peeled back and sold off every other real estate venture that we had and then focused full time on lending.
And looking back at that first originated loan, do you kind of look back at it and chuckle a little bit? Like the way you structure it, the way you did the deal, it's obviously probably a lot different than you're doing now, but what about that deal made it possible, right? How did you get started in that first deal? How did you put that deal together?
Yeah, looking back, we kind of did everything wrong. I mean, we did our own legal docs. We got a lot of them, Frankenstein together from some Google searches that we did. Didn't have proper insurance on it. Didn't do some of the checks. Didn't escrow the funds adequately. I mean, like you kind of go down the list of everything you could do wrong, and we did it. And it was a mess of a project too. I mean, the picture is still on our website actually, but it was a hoarder's house. So the flipper underestimated what it was actually going to cost to get it done, to get it cleaned up and moved out. So it was on every level that was not done correctly, and especially not done as how we do it now. But for us, it's just the aha moment. And the aha moment at the time was, man, this is the first thing that we have found in real estate that we're able to do alongside a W-2 at the same time. And so for the first 5 years of the company, we didn't bring on any third-party capital. It was just self-funded. So we basically seed funded the company and then just deployed that capital, like I said, for the first 5 years. So we were relatively small, and we really only started rapidly growing in the last 2 years when we started bringing on third-party capital investors.
And was that first deal attached to the company itself, or after a couple of those you realized, hey, let's make a company out of this?
Well, we ended up forming an LLC right from the start. Yeah, so you guys always under an LLC. That was another thing that we'd learned. Again, you take all these learnings from your real estate journey, and that was one of the things we learned is, LLCs are easy to make, and they're very important from a liability perspective.
Understood. Okay, so from the jump, it's already taken as like a very much a business decision to move forward with. So I love that. So right again, so starting at that foundation. So moving forward, as you begin to scale from that first deal to the next, and you're slowly learning your steps, what was kind of the big ignition factor, if you will? What caused you to go from 1 to 2 to 2 to 4, 4 to 8? Like, how did you begin to scale? Was a lot of your networking or the exposure you had, or more of just your experience and knew how to go after some deals?
Yeah, I think I'll paint you a picture here. We started in 2017 with our first loan, and we were, like I said, self-funded so we approximately had $400,000 of our own capital working, and we basically just grew that capital for approximately 4.5-ish years, right? And so that 400,000 went to like 800,000. So we were able to double our money. It was great. The big jumping off point actually came because we had family and friends asking us a few years ago, hey, can we invest alongside you guys and earn a yield as well? And so we initially brought on some family, and then family and friends, and then that grew. And so we, over the last 2 years, 2.5 years, we rapidly have expanded from having less than $1 million in assets under management to today having over $20 million in assets under management. So if you were to kind of like mentally draw that line out, it's just basically a flat line for almost 5 years, and then it just shoots up like a hockey stick. So yeah, but the big shift for us was they're just family and friends saying, hey, can I invest alongside you guys? Because what that allowed us to do is having access to the additional capital allowed us to scale up the operations. Because one unique thing about the hard money lending space, which is not true for several other industries, but the business has to scale up in kind of a teeter-totter. So you have to scale up your deal flow, and you have to scale up your investor capital, and you have to inch those up together, because if one way outranges another, it can kind of spell a little bit of trouble for a hard money lender.
And just because we're on that topic, how would you go up for someone starting out? How would you go about tackling those two together, right? If you're trying to find your first couple of deals, you've got 1 or 2 in the pipeline, but you're wanting to grow. How do you go about balancing those two and making sure that it stays kind of balanced?
It's one of the harder things that a hard money lender will have to deal with, especially in the growth phase. Once you kind of get to the maintenance phase, it does become a little bit easier. I would say there is no magic formula. You just have to be hyper aware of what is coming down the pipeline and your kind of your marketing funnel, and realistically how much capital you can raise. And the spot where people probably get into a little bit more trouble is committing to funding deals and then not being able to raise the capital. And so, if that happens, well, as you can imagine, this is a reputation game as well. And if you're coming to the funding table and you're not able to write a check at the day of closing, it's a very, very bad sign for the business. and it can quickly ruin your reputation. I mean, one of the things that Jeremy and myself are very proud of is, and we have it on our new borrower intro email is, in 7+ years, we've never missed a funding. So when we commit to a closing, we absolutely come through for the client. But that's the main thing. Don't overestimate your ability to fundraise. Don't overcommit for deals that are coming up, and be honest with people when you can't fund it. Any lender will tell you, when you have a really good deal in front of you and you just don't have the capital to close it, it's just a terrible feeling. It is, but you have to be honest with your clients, and you have to tell them, hey, I just can't fund this right now. I'm sorry, we're just a little capital constrained.
Understood. And same thing on the same plane of honesty, right? Let's not downplay this like, hey, this is some free cash flow and stuff you're doing on the side. This is very much a full-time role, right? You left one full-time role for another, but to your point, you're doing something now you're more passionate about. It gives you more time to your family and friends. Talk to us a little bit about like kind of what, maybe not the day-to-day is, but more so, yeah, what are some of the workload things that you have to be aware of to stay on top of to make sure that you're still successful?
Yeah. Well, I'll dive into the first part of your question there a little bit. Ultimately, where it got to with me personally is the business really exploded in size, really 2020, 2021. And it got to the point where it started superseding the cash flow from my W-2 job, right? And so essentially early 2024, I really had a decision to make. I was working 40 to 50 hours on the engineering job. I was working probably another 40 hours on Crown Capital Resources. And then, of course, I'm a father and I've got a wife and 2 young daughters. So I was balancing 3 really big things and doing an okay job at all 3 of them probably. And so that to me, I really kind of woke up and said, I need to choose 2 of these things, right? So family's a default. So I really needed to choose between my engineering career and pursuing this hard money lending full time. Obviously, I'm on the podcast, so you know which way I went. I ended up resigning from the engineering role in March of 2024 and pursuing this full time. And then, so life now, I can say that as any early entrepreneur or anybody who's maybe thinking about it could probably tell you, it's very, very scary to jump off. You feel like the safety net has been pulled out from under you, and it's mentally challenging. But my personal experience has been really incredible. The autonomy over my own time is something that myself, I value more than almost anything in the world. Right. So like what I was, and as far as a career. So when I was looking and actually distilling down what I wanted in a job, I realized that it wasn't to not work and it wasn't to just make bukus of money. It was really just autonomy over my own time. And I realized that no matter how good of a W-2 job that you have, and I had a great one, you'll never have that. So now I have that, and it's a totally different schedule. It's not to say that I'm not working hard, because I'm still putting in over 40 hours a week for sure. But at least for me, it's so much more enjoyable because I'm able to take those personal time when I need it. As an example, today I ended up, my daughter wanted to go to the Museum of Natural Science here in Houston, and so I ended up taking off work from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. and taking her to the butterfly exhibit, actually. But what was so nice about that is, I've got a podcast recording at 6:30, and I'll have to put a little bit more work in after this. But I didn't have to ask anybody if I go take my daughter to the museum. And so that is kind of a microcosm of what I was really chasing, is just to have the authority over to say, yeah, let's go do that. And so, anyways, it's been a really positive change for me, but I'm also at the tail end of doing both things for, over 7 years. And so for me, when I left the W-2 job, it was like dropping 40 hours of my life off and being able to capture that back as personal time. So, it was clearly going to be a very positive change in my life.
Hey, Frontier family. If you're finding value in today's episode, then Nathan and I want to tell you about a Facebook and LinkedIn community we're trying to grow of like-minded entrepreneurs who want to learn more to earn more. We share and discuss relevant topics, strategies, ideas, and overall ways to grow your net worth. So if you're interested in learning more, check down in the description of this video or this podcast to find the links to those pages. All right, let's get back into it. Absolutely, man. And that's an awesome story, right? Like what this change, and not only like mindset in terms of, to your point of laying out your goal, like what am I trying to achieve? What am I passionate about? What do I want to do? But then being able to do that and seeing how it plays out like that's an awesome story, man. That's awesome. Breaking that through though, it sounds like a lot of what you're talking with the autonomy through work, especially in engineering, being one myself, right? And kind of having that responsibility and respect kind of there, but then kind of finding ways to grow through that, right? Because one of the major things of engineering is as your role grows, so does kind of your commitment to the job.
Yes.
Right. So has some of that now come in relieved as well? Like now you're still committed, right? It's your business, but like you don't owe anybody else except yourself kind of that own world, right? Is that kind of a similar mindset in terms of what you're experiencing?
Yeah, I think you really keyed into a key part of my story. And that is what I realized was exactly right. As you move up in an organization, your commitment to that role and to that company only increases proportionally. And so it's not the situation that as you move up, you kind of get more lax in your schedule. When I was first, and I'll give you a kind of an anecdotal story, is that when I was first starting out as a staff engineer, I would come into work on a Monday, and if I looked at my weekly calendar, I had about 4 hours that was committed towards meetings, right? So the idea would be 4 hours committed to meetings, 36 hours committed towards engineering work. Well, I ultimately ended up working my way up to a division engineering manager. And when you move up into those roles and you wake up, you get to work on a Monday morning, it's almost the inverse. I would look at my weeks and go, I have like 32 hours that I'm going to be sitting in meetings or calls or whatever, that they're not my own. And then I get 8-ish hours to basically work on technical projects. And that's kind of a great anecdote to say, like, you get less control over your time as you increase, and then as you move up to a VP or an EVP, that trend only continues. In fact, I had dinner with one of our executives, and he was telling me that his entire year is planned out ahead of him. And he was like, we're traveling 30 plus weeks a year. And it's like, he's like, I have 6 weeks vacation, but I can barely take 10 days. I mean, he's like going on and on. I'm like, man. And it's exactly right. That when you move up in the organization, there's a proportional amount of sacrifice that you've got to give as well.
And so building that down to the role you're currently in, right? Where do you feel like you're going to take the company now? Like to your point, you're in a massive scale phase, right? You're trying to balance that teeter-totter, right? Where do you feel like you're really going to take the company and kind of continue to grow? Is it just in kind of the private lending space? Do you plan on expanding your lending opportunities? Where's Crown Capital Resources going?
Yeah. So when I left in March 2024, we had approximately 10 million in AUM. Today we're at 20. Our goal for Jeremy and myself over the course of 2025, we want to go from 20 to 40 million. I don't necessarily know what my 3-year and 5-year plan is. We're hyper focused on the next 12 months. And what we really need to focus on is doubling the size of the company, reducing the risk in the portfolio, and batting down any other distractions that we might have. And those are plentiful, because when you move into this space and you're kind of known as a company that has capital and individuals that have capital are willing to lend, you get a lot of ancillary opportunities. Hey, do you want to invest in my Airbnb service company or management company? We did. Do you want to invest in my bait and tackle company? We did that. Do you want to invest in my construction business? You want to invest? So there's all these different opportunities that we get. And we had done a lot of things in the past, but what Jeremy and I have decided to in 2024 is we're just going to hyper focus on our bread and butter. We're going to stay in our lane. We're going to grow this business, and we're going to bulletproof this business. And then I think in starting in 2026, we'll start to look at, well, what does this really look like for expanding? In my mind, there's kind of 3 avenues to do that. Number one, you could just say, let's repeat last year and let's grow the AUM of the hard money lending business. Essentially repeat 2025. Option 2, which we could do, is to say, let's vertically integrate into another piece of a real estate lending business. Let's focus more on, double close or, same day transactions. Or let's maybe opening up a division for long-term financing. And then number 3, potential opportunity we could do is to say, hey, maybe we want to make a significant capital investment into another venture. So I don't know where that's going to lead in 2026, but we did, 2024 had some distractions just from other investments that we made. And so I think this next year we're just laser focused.
And did any of these ideas come like through mentorship and like times of discussion with others? Was there a time you brought somebody into the company to kind of help foresee some of these items?
No, not necessarily. They happen very organically for us. Like I said, just it's just word of mouth. Hey, how'd you fund this? Who gave you this gap funding, or would they be willing to do this venture? Yeah, I don't know. Give them a call. So it's basically that. No marketing or anything like that. It's just really word of mouth for us. But it's tough though, because growing a business and learning the intricacies of a business is a very, very difficult venture. And the people who can do it across, 5 to 10 businesses, I have so much respect for, because I'm just trying to still bulletproof and do it for one. Correct now.
Well, and one of those strategies, right, that you're implementing is kind of going away from like the friends family funding, triple F, and kind of moving this into a little bit more not that it was ever illegitimate, but like more legitimate now that you're on the 506c offering, right?
Yeah.
Talk to us about that transition and kind of how that changed the projection moving forward.
Yeah. So one of the first things that we really focused on when I went full time, so right around March, April timeframe, is what does this look like for the next inning of the business? And up until at that point, we had done everything through what's known in our industry as a participation model. So essentially, think through it like this: we would get a project together, we would build an investor prospectus that had, just the project high level financial details, a little bit of the client bio, the underwriting that we did. And then we would send that project out to our investor base via email. And then our investor base would come back and say, hey, I'll take $50,000 of that deal. Right. And so we were basically, having to play Tetris with all these deals. And one financial transaction, one funding might have had 4 or 5 investors on it. And so the first thing we realized was, if we could move into a fund structure whereby investors put capital towards a fund and then the fund deploys the capital, number one, it's going to streamline all that busy work, and it's going to massively increase our operational efficiency. But then the second advantage of creating a fund is that as you start moving into higher net worth individuals, they like the idea of a SEC regulated income fund, reviewed financials. And they like the idea of having a private placement memorandum and an offering subscription agreement, which clearly states what you can and cannot do as a business. And so we realized that, when you grow your fund from $1 million to $5 million, you can do that at $100,000 clips. Like bring a people, and a lot of our fund is, like I mentioned, built of family and friends. A lot of engineers in our income fund. And so, as you could imagine, engineers who are in their mid-30s, they're probably investing in the 1 to 200,000 range. Where our vision was with this company to get to 30 and 40 and 50 million AUM, the reality is you just can't raise $100,000 clips. Moving into an income fund, regulated fund, was, in our opinion, like the next right step in order to get people who would be willing to write $1 million check. So we ended up completing that which that was a total nightmare to do, to transition into that. But we ended up completing that right around August 5th. And it took us a solid 3+ months to get everything transitioned over from one structure to the other structure. But we finally finished it. So we're 100% in the fund model now, raising exclusively through the fund and then funding properties exclusively through the fund. And it's nice because we're finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel through all the train wreck that was the transition piece of it. But there's definitely a reason that people do it once they get bigger, because it's really the only way to scale.
And just for my own sake, would you say the participation model at all is similar to like a syndication model? Like, is it just kind of one for its own, or because it's lending, it can't be called that? How close or how opposite are those terms?
Typically a syndication is still a GP-LP structure. So it would actually be a little bit, from a doc perspective and a legal structure perspective, it'd be a little bit closer to the fund. The participation agreement is a very, some lenders probably wouldn't love me saying this, but in my opinion, it's just a very crude and unregulated way to put the deals together. Because you're essentially putting the deals together as Crown Capital Resources. We would take, 20% of the deal, and then we would build out the rest of the capital stack with other investors, and we would just send out participation agreements saying you own 15% of this project, essentially. And so it's a great way to start out. Don't get me wrong, because the barrier to entry is like zero. And so it definitely made sense early on. And of course, you would never create a fund if you were self-funding. Like if you were just starting out, you would never create a fund because also the expenses to create a fund are like $20,000 to $50,000. They're very expensive. But yeah, I mean, and we operated that way. But as you could imagine, as an operator, every single week we were having multiple properties paying off. Every single week we were having multiple properties funding, and every single one of those funding or payoffs, there were 4 to 6 investors on it. So it just became just a train wreck operationally. And I realized that I'm just spending a ton of time on the busy work. This is all just busy work that's not actually moving the business forward. It's just kind of maintaining the business.
Similar to kind of your previous investments in ventures, was it still good learning and kind of building blocks though? Like getting through these early stages in this initial strategy was still the way to go to that next stage?
Yes, absolutely. And the way to think about investments as a young entrepreneur, as a young investor, is it's always better to start small, because likely you're going to be doing everything wrong. You're going to make mistakes, and you might even lose some money. But better to lose, $5,000-$10,000 early on than lose $50,000-$100,000 later. So if I were to have some advice for young people starting out, it would be don't focus at all on the money early on. You need to focus on learning everything you can about the business and industry. You need to focus on growing your systems and your people and knowing everything there is to know about how to run a profitable business and do proper risk mitigation. If you're just focused on growth for the sake of growth, that just creates a lot of problems downstream. And so for us, that was kind of a fortuitous thing, because we grew really, really slowly for several years, and it was all our own money. And so we didn't lose money. We didn't lose any money at all for the longest time. But even if we had, it would have been all our own capital. It's a whole other thing once you start raising, especially with friends and family, because you become a fiduciary for them as well. And like, as you could imagine, that's a whole level of stress that comes with that as well.
And to that point, to hopefully avoid stress of someone else looking to start in this, what's like 2 or 3 major items someone should be aware of if they're wanting to get into kind of that more participation model? What can they do to set themselves up for success to go to the next stage?
Yeah, I would say if it kind of depends at what stage you are. If you're really looking to be a private lender, and you don't have a ton of capital, the easiest way to probably do it would be to just passively invest in a fund, right? And so that way, or in the participation model to another hard money lender. That way you can kind of see the process. You can get some insight as to how the loans were originated, what the docs look like, and start to get a feel of the business in general. That would be kind of stage one. If you're a little bit farther down on the learning curve and you have the basics understanding of how a hard money lending company works, then what you really need to do is get a hard grasp of how much capital that you can raise. Because the reality in today's market is, if you can only raise $200,000, that means you can only really fund one deal at a time. So it's, don't expect that like you're going to be going out there funding 10, 20 properties at a time if you don't have access to the capital. And that is one of the biggest barriers to entry to starting a hard money lending company, is really the capital. And that's one of the things that we did. We are lucky in such that, the engineering space does have some people who are high W-2 income earners. And so we had a pretty fertile network when we really started buckling down and talking to people about, hey, this is what we're doing, and fundraising. We ended up being able to fundraise a lot more than we thought we were going to be able to. But that's going to be a hard thing early on, is understanding how much capital you can realistically raise. But what I would recommend doing is if at all possible, just invest your own dollars at first, and that way you can learn. There's a little bit less skin in the game when you don't have your mom's money working, right? So that would be my recommendation for people is just, that would be kind of one of the biggest thing is understand how much capital you truly have. And it might only be enough to fund 1 or 2 loans. And then really to go out and find 1 or 2 loans to do, relatively easy. I mean, you could just go to a real estate meetup and probably within 2 meetups, find somebody to fund it. that's probably going to be less your issue, especially if you're in a strong market like Texas.
Is it ever common that you see a fund kind of fund another fund's deal? I know I said fund a couple of times there, but like you mentioned some early strategies. Like if you don't have if say a deal came across you that's $300,000, is it ever possible that maybe you hand that contract to a larger fund, but you ask that you be a part of that deal? Like, is that a possible strategy at all, just to get started?
So what you can do is you can broker deals. So typically speaking, funds won't invest in other funds because the bylaws of the fund, which is, this offering subscription agreement that you lay out in front of your investors, it'll say Crown Capital Resources can only originate first lien positions on Texas properties with a max of 70% loan to value, et cetera, et cetera. So you're limited by that. But what you can do is you can say, hey, here's a great deal from a borrower that I know well. I just don't have the capacity to fund this. I want to broker this deal to you and add a point for me. So that's super common. We just got one today, actually. And the guy basically said, it's a $300,000 loan. I want you to do it, but add a broker fee on for me. So he kept 1 point as a broker. So he'll end up making $3,000 on the transaction. And then that'll just come out of the HUD statement. So it'll be our origination fee, our underwriting fee, the attorney fees, title fees, and then it'll have a $3,000 broker fee on it as well. So that's another reason why hard money lenders, are pretty friendly with each other, is because it's a massive market, and oftentimes, we're all playing the same game. We're balancing capital and deal flow. So when there's a mismatch there, you want a reputable hard money lender that that you can pass a deal off to, and number one, monetize it, but number two, also make sure that the client is taken care of.
Well, it sounds like that's possibly one of the ways you keep that teeter-totter balance, right? Like, because you have high deal flow, you may not be able to cover all of them, but if you know other lenders, other people who have take on this deal or come into a contract with you to do it, you still become the hero in the end, right? You still made that contract happen, but also you didn't put your company behind, right? Because you couldn't fund that deal. You found a way to pass it on. So it sounds like it's just another strategy to your point, keep that teeter-totter balance.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The only negative to that is that you don't want to lose your really good clients. As you could imagine, the people who just knock it out of the park, do great renovations, underwrite well, are great to deal with, never miss an interest payment. You hate to lose those guys, but ultimately, we've always maintained the mindset that we're not going to beat our competitors on rates and fees. Like in other words, we're not the cheapest lender out there. But we've always said that we're just going to beat people on service, right? And so we say, hey, when you call us, we either pick up right away or we call you within the next few minutes. You ask for a term sheet, we'll get it out in the next 10, 15 minutes. You ask a draw request, it's not going to take 2 weeks. It'll take, 8 hours. So that, we've always maintained, as long as we run a tight ship and maintain ourselves as super borrower, client service oriented, that even if somebody goes to another hard money lender, they will eventually come back to us because it was such a good experience.
So the competitive edge is more so kind of speed of response and your ability to turn that deal around, right? Like have next day or a couple of day turnover for that lending.
Yes. The nice thing about, I will say this, the nice thing about the lending space is that there's a lot of really poor customer service. And I think the one of the reasons for that is, if you think about the lending space, it's in terms of a spectrum. On the very far left-hand side, you've got basically the handshake agreements. And that is, hey, I'm a wealthy doctor, attorney, or engineer, and I know a buddy who's doing real estate flips, and I'm just going to loan him money at 10, 12% with a handshake. Like no contracts, it's the Wild West. And then on the very far right side, you have the nationwide lenders. So these are the massive companies that have, RCM Capital or Kiabi, and they've got billion-dollar loan books. They're huge. And they've got a mountain of people, and they have a huge high turnover. So every time you call in, you're kind of talking to a different person. And then, but within that structure as well, is they've got multiple layers of bureaucracy. So when they send you a term sheet, that might change, or you might come to closing and with a different term sheet. And then draw payments, like I mentioned, might take several weeks. So we kind of maintain ourselves in the middle. We want to have the capital capacity to fund, like I mentioned, tens of millions of dollars of notes, but we want to have just, the top tier customer service, because that's where we're going to win. I mean, we have clients of ours that will tell us we charge 3% origination, 12% interest. And we have clients that say, hey, I have other lenders that charge me 10 and 2, which is substantially cheaper. But they are such a pain to deal with that I'm just going to go with you guys. And so that's kind of a business decision we've made early on, is we would rather over deploy resources into creating a really great service experience than have a subpar service experience and then erode our net income by decreasing our rates.
That sounds like definitely the way to do it. And I've been surprised, honestly. I wouldn't call it necessarily barrier to entry, but kind of barrier to success, if you will. Like, just the ability and willingness to kind of do better than your competitors is really not that crazy. So kind of in a way, barrier to entry to success, I don't know, kind of a mix of them all. But yeah, if you do a couple of things great, you stand out surprisingly well compared to others. Not that it needs to be a competition, but just to that point. So if you can find something yourself that just beats the next person, whether it be in that service or picking up that phone or calling them back in 5 minutes, that alone will set you apart from the other lenders.
Yeah. I mean, it's that simple. And this advice that we do, this can be applied towards any business owner. But my background is engineering. And so I'm always thinking, like, let's get 1% better every day. And so what I do oftentimes is I'll actually call our clients up and I'll just say, hey, what went well about this? We just finished funding a deal together. What did you like? Okay, I got it. What did you not like? And I'll tell them, listen, just be honest with me. I mean, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I'm trying to get better. Seriously, what can I do better? And the feedback we get, I'm like, man, people would pay a business consultant like $10,000 a day for this sort of feedback. And it's great. And sometimes it's like, hey, I didn't get a lot of clarity from when it moved from the loan origination to the loan processor, and sending an automated email saying, hey, Linda, our loan processor is now handling your loan file. She'll be your primary point of contact. They're like, that'd be a great thing. I was like, yeah, that's a no-brainer to implement. So it's things like that. So we're constantly seeking out feedback and improving our processes. And it's a cumulative effect. And that's for any business. I mean, it's just that you get a little bit better every week. And at the end of the year, you're going to look back at your business and go, man, like we moved mountains this year.
David, it seems like you're nothing but just the ideal entrepreneur. And I'm not just cheesing you up here a little bit. The idea that, you're improving the processes, you're improving the service, you're doing everything you can. You've got your plan set out. You guys are doing, it sounds like everything right. To that point, I know we've hit a lot today, but if there's one major thing you either want someone to take away or something you haven't mentioned yet, what would it be for someone wanting to kind of get into this lending space, and how could they achieve similar success to what you've achieved?
I would say the most important thing is just to start doing something about it. And I know that listening to podcasts, there's a huge propensity to just feel like you're really behind, and to feel like you have imposter syndrome. But we all feel that way. I even feel that way listening to other podcasts for, other entrepreneurs or business owners. So if you're really interested in moving into a space, let's call it the lending space, the actionable advice that I can give to a young individual would be to find another person who's actually runs a hard money lending company. Find them through a Facebook group or a real estate meetup or whatnot, or Bigger Pockets or any of these outlets. And I would just reach out to them and say, hey, I want to learn about the industry. I'm willing to work for free. And say, you can give me the grunt work. If you want to put me on lead source generation, I'm good with that. If you want to put me on marketing, I'm good with that. If you want me to help you with, your loan originations or underwriting, whatever, I'm good with that. I'll just work for free. And I would just say, just focus on getting some experience and exposure into the lending space and really figuring out, hey, am I passionate about this? Do I love this? Because you might find out you don't. Just like I did on every other step of my real estate journey, I ultimately found out I'm just not really passionate about it. And so that would be my one big piece of advice. If you could flip the script and you could imagine you were a business owner and somebody called, a young, driven individual called you and said, hey, I'm willing to work for free, your answer is going to be absolutely, right? And so think about it this way. This is the mental framework. When you're young, you don't have capital and you don't have experience, but you have time. So use your time very, very wisely and forego your time to gain the other two, right? Because as you get older, as you can imagine, you have capital, you have a ton of experience, but you don't have the time. So lend your time out to a business owner And in return, you're going to figure out, A, you're going to get experience in the industry, but B, you're going to figure out, do I actually have a passion and a drive that I want to do this for the rest of my life?
And with all those great ideas, right, I'm sure a lot of education sources came about to get you to these ideas, right, to be able to talk to some of this stuff. What were some major impactful items, whether they be books, podcasts, people, whatever it may be, that you'd be willing to share to help someone else kind of learn from the same things that you learned from?
The early on, when you're getting going, podcasts and YouTube videos are great first source of information. If you've actually kind of like driven off the deep end and you're in the industry and you're starting out, there are these things called masterminds that you can join. And they have masterminds for everything. They have masterminds for, vitamin sales. They have vitamins for e-commerce. They have vitamins for hard money lenders. They have vitamins for, masterminds for flippers. So what I would recommend is paying the ridiculous amount of money. It's going to be like $10,000. But join a mastermind, find a good one, join it. And then what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to sit down in a room full of 10 to 20 other professionals that are doing exactly that business. And they've been doing it for 20, 30 years. And I can tell you from my personal experience, when we joined a mastermind, it blew up our learning curve like you wouldn't believe. We had just over 100 years of lending wisdom sitting in a room, and we got to spend all week with these individuals, these business owners, and understand what was going right in their business, what had gone wrong historically in their business. We got to share about what was happening in our company, talk through our struggles, and get actionable recommendations. So that definitely something to put on your radar, not initially because it's expensive and whatnot, but if you're starting off in an industry or a business and you really want to just jump a few years down ahead of the curve, like that is absolutely what I'd recommend doing.
And if anyone wants to reach directly out to you for some more information or come along for the ride with your company, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So my email is david@crowncapitalresources.com. And our website address is crowncapitalresources.com. So you can reach out to me. That's my direct email. And even if you just have general questions or just want to jump on a call and pick my brain, I'm happy to do so.
Awesome. David, I really appreciate your time and commitment to today, sir. This has been a bunch of great information, and we look forward to any collaboration in the future, man.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you.